tanker fires, drone strikes, naval standoffs in the middle of the night. The Strait of Hormuz has been in the headlines again, and this time, the shipping industry is not pretending everything is fine. A stretch of water, barely 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, just triggered the most serious rerouting of global cargo since the Suez Crisis. Insurance premiums on vessels passing through the Gulf have shot up by as much as 600%. Major shipping lines have already begun pulling their fleets away from the region entirely, and the consequences are rippling from fuel prices in Europe to grocery shelves in Asia. But to understand why this one choke point has the power to do all of that, you need to understand what the Strait of Hormuz actually is, why it was always a disaster waiting to happen, and what is unfolding there right now that has naval commanders genuinely worried. The Strait of Hormuz sits between Iran to the north and Oman to the south. It connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman, and from there to the rest of the world's oceans. At its narrowest, you are looking at about 21 miles of navigable water. Inside that 21 miles, the internationally recognized shipping lanes run just 2 miles wide in each direction with a 2-mile buffer zone between them. Think about what that means in practice. Every supertanker, every LNG carrier, every vessel loaded with crude oil bound for Japan, South Korea, China, India, or Europe must squeeze through those lanes. There is no alternate route. There is no pipeline capable of replacing the volume. There is no plan B that the global economy has actually built and paid for. Roughly 20 to 21 million barrels of oil pass through the strait every single day. That is approximately 20% of the world's total oil supply and nearly a third of all liquefied natural gas traded globally. When analysts talk about choke points, they usually mean it as a metaphor. Here, it is completely literal. Squeeze this strait, and you are squeezing the circulatory system of the global economy. The strait has been contested territory for decades. Iran has threatened to close it during multiple confrontations with the United States, most notably in 1987 during the Tanker War, when Iranian forces attacked neutral shipping during the Iran-Iraq conflict. The U.S. Navy responded by reflagging Kuwaiti tankers under the American flag and deploying a significant escort force, a mission called Operation Earnest Will. At one point, a U.S. frigate struck an Iranian mine and nearly sank. The situation came within a single miscalculation of open naval warfare. It never fully settled. The tension compressed, changed shape, and re-emerged. In 2019, a series of tanker attacks in the Gulf of Oman were attributed to Iranian forces by the United States and allied governments. Iran denied responsibility. The ships were hit with limpet mines attached below the waterline. Crews abandoned vessels in lifeboats. Surveillance footage from U.S. military aircraft appeared to show Iranian naval vessels retrieving unexploded mines from a stricken ship's hull. The world watched, condemned, and moved on. That was the mistake, because the underlying dynamic never changed. Iran's strategic doctrine has always treated the Strait of Hormuz as its primary leverage point against Western pressure. When sanctions tighten, when military threats escalate, when diplomatic negotiations collapse, Iranian military planners return to the same calculation. We cannot match the U.S. Navy in open battle, but we do not need to. We just need to make the strait too dangerous to use. The tools for doing that have expanded significantly. Iran now operates one of the largest drone fleets in the Middle East. Its naval forces include fast attack craft designed to swarm larger vessels, submarines capable of laying mines, and shore-based anti-ship missile batteries positioned along the northern coastline. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, which operates separately from the conventional Iranian Navy, has demonstrated a willingness to seize foreign vessels, harass commercial shipping, and conduct operations that would constitute acts of war if carried out by any other nation against any other navy. In 2023, IRGC forces seized 2 oil tankers in less than 6 months. In both cases, the vessels were boarded, crews were detained, and the ships were towed to Iranian ports. The legal justifications offered were widely rejected by international maritime law experts. The real message was simpler. We can take your ships, and there is no mechanism that will stop us fast enough to matter. Now layer the current regional conflict onto that baseline. The war in Gaza, Houthi missile and drone attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea, and deepening Iranian involvement in the broader proxy conflict across the Middle East have fundamentally changed the risk calculus for shipping companies. Vessels that were already wary of the Persian Gulf are now operating in an environment where attacks on commercial shipping have been normalized to a degree not seen in decades. The insurance market responded faster than governments did. War risk premiums, which had been running at a fraction of a percent of a vessel's value, surged. Some underwriters began excluding the entire Gulf region from standard policies, forcing operators to seek specialized coverage at costs that made certain voyages economically unviable. When a shipping company cannot insure a vessel, it does not send the vessel. The math is that simple. Several of the world's largest container lines began announcing Gulf detours or suspensions. Some rerouted around the Cape of Good Hope, adding 10 to 14 days to voyages and significantly increasing fuel costs. Others halted Gulf operations altogether and waited to see how the situation developed. The result was a quiet but severe disruption to the supply chains that the global economy had spent 30 years optimizing for speed and cost. Oil prices moved, freight rates moved, and in markets from Rotterdam to Singapore, traders began pricing in a scenario that most had treated as theoretical for years: a sustained degradation of the Strait of Hormuz as a reliable commercial corridor. The U.S. Navy has responded by increasing its presence in the region. Carrier strike groups have been repositioned. Destroyers are conducting escort operations. Naval advisors have briefed allied governments on mine-clearing capabilities and convoy procedures that had not been discussed seriously since the Cold War. But the fundamental problem has not changed and may not be solvable by naval presence alone. The strait is too narrow, too close to Iranian territory, and too critical to defend perfectly. A determined adversary with mines, drones, and fast attack boats operating in familiar waters does not need to sink a carrier. It needs to raise the cost of transit high enough and maintain that threat long enough that the commercial shipping industry makes the same calculation it made in the Red Sea. The risk is not worth it. The difference between the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz is scale. Rerouting around Yemen costs time and money. Rerouting around the Persian Gulf means leaving behind the crude oil that runs a significant portion of the world's refineries. There is no Cape of Good Hope for Persian Gulf energy exports. The oil does not go anywhere else. It either comes through the strait or it does not come at all. The countries most exposed to a prolonged Hormuz disruption are Japan, South Korea, China, and India, all of which depend on Gulf crude for a substantial share of their energy needs. China alone imports roughly 40% of its oil from the Persian Gulf region. A sustained closure or even a severe degradation of commercial transit would force emergency drawdowns of strategic petroleum reserves, trigger domestic energy price spikes, and accelerate political pressure on governments to find solutions that do not currently exist. That pressure matters because it shapes how quickly and how forcefully the international community responds to Iranian provocations. Countries that need the oil have a limited appetite for confrontation with the country that controls the northern coastline of the strait. That tension between energy dependency and strategic resolve is exactly the leverage Iran has always understood it possesses. The Strait of Hormuz has not closed. Tankers are still moving through it, but the shipping industry is now operating in a state of managed fear, where every voyage involves a calculation about risk that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. The infrastructure of global trade, optimized for a world that assumed the strait would always be open, is showing the cracks that geopolitical risk always exposes eventually. The question is not whether the world can survive a week without Persian Gulf oil. It is whether the institutions, the navies, and the diplomatic frameworks built after the tanker war are still capable of holding this bottleneck open in a conflict environment that has grown substantially more complex, more lethal, and more willing to use commercial shipping as a weapon. The answer to that question is being written right now, 21 miles at a time.